Anyway, I wanted to go to the 707.
Okay.
No, you're going to the VC-10. So I went to the VC-10. And then you have to train to stuff a sextant out of the aeroplane and shoot the stars and be a navigator as well as a pilot. So there's another little course to go on. I did all that, and I had a very pleasant few years on the VC-10 until 1970, when the first jumbos came along. And that came along, I thought, that's a lovely looking aeroplane, it's nice and big. And I wanted to fly something really big. I thought, I'll have a go at getting on that. Well, it was no problem, because nobody else wanted to go on it. It was a very junior set of first officers went on that to start with. But I was one of those in 1970, 71-ish beginning. I went on the course, and I went then as a first officer on the first the 100 series.
Why do you think people didn't want to transition to that particular
aircraft? Pilots are very, very conservative with a little c, and they don't like new type. Lots of them don't. And certainly there was an ageing first officer. They were all senior first officers because that BOC hadn't recruited for years, and we were the first in. So it was really good to get on that aeroplane very early. I loved it. The first few years on the jumbo, you learn a hell of a lot because a lot goes wrong. And certainly with the 100 jumbo, the Pratt & Whitney engines were absolute rubbish. And if you could do a trip without an engine failure, you were doing well. And in those 5-6 years, from 70 to 76, I had 23 engine failures on the jumbo, 18 of which were catastrophic engine failures, went off with a big bang. It was blooming good fun, I tell you. It was marvellous.
That's one way to describe it.
It was. Well, and you learn so much when these things go wrong. Well, we had 6 aeroplanes to start with, and at one stage, all 6 were marooned between London and Johannesburg because they were all down the route with engine failures, and one had been sent out with one attached to, and no, it was quite a joke. I loved it. It was a mystery tour.
Oh, sorry, what would you say was the main cause of the
engines were
failure?
crap.
Just because they were poorly built?
They were. The material was dreadful in them. They were Pratt & Whitney, and they kept falling apart.
And there was obviously an ongoing dialogue with Boeing and
Oh, yes.
And the airlines to say that this problem's
they didn't have many engines in the world that, you had to trouble to get a spare engine because they pull these engines all over the place, as you know. And the Boeing with the Pratt & Whitney JT9D, whatever, the 100 jumbo was very under-engined.
So you weren't very keen on the climb rate?
No, the climb was dreadful. It was nearly a negative climb rate. I mean, if you took off from Heathrow and you got out over Strumble, out over the Welsh coast, if you got to 28,000 feet, you were doing very well going across the Ogden. Yeah, but it was great fun. I loved it. So I had 5-6 years on the VC-10 before that, and I went to first officer on the jumbo, and then they said, right, we give you a command now in 75, 76, and I bid to go on a command on the 707. No, I couldn't get on that. They gave me one on the VC-10. So then I did 4 years as a captain on the VC-10 when I got back onto the jumbo. And by that stage, there were 200s jumbos with 4 Pratt & Whitney JT9Ds. And that was 2 years before this thing out in Jakarta.
Which would be good to talk about, obviously, because that's how I first came across you.
I'm just amazed that it's still talking about it now, because it happened on June the 24th, 1982, at 13:44 GMT, the first engine stopped. And here we are 40 odd years later still talking about it. And I thought the interest would last about 6 months.
And do you get tired of talking about it?
No, because I think it's kept my feet on the ground. I know that, excuse me, one or two of the crew members, not the pilot or the flight engineer, I'm careful what I say here, but one or two people have had mental problems around the thing. And I haven't.
You're referring to like post-traumatic stress?
Yeah, whatever that is. I could engineer that if they'd like me to have a dose of post-traumatic stress. I'm a bit cynical about the whole thing, personally. But to me, counselling is a kick up the arse and a pint of beer. Yeah?
Yes, and works for you.
It does, yeah. Because it's up here. You've got to get into it. I needed to carry on flying. I loved it to bits. And I was determined to get over it. I just didn't want to die. That's all at the time. That's all that went through my mind. I'm not going to die.
There's quite a lot to unravel here, and I thought I'd start with the me being a 12-year-old, and it was my first family holiday, long haul, wide body, and being a boy that's fascinated with aircraft, I've said to my dad, I guess like many people have asked these questions, if we lost all engines, what would happen? Just intrigued by that. And usually you'd get an uneducated response. But he had a case study for this particular question, and it was your story. And that's when I was 12 years old, that's when I first heard about this flight, and it's fascinated me ever since. And actually to sit down here opposite you is an honour. And it'd be great to hear from takeoff in Kuala Lumpur how this all unravelled.
Yeah, well, it was a normal flight. It wasn't really, I suppose. We were a crew. We were together because normally the flight deck and the cabin crew would go on different rosters and you'd lose them somewhere. But we'd stuck together since out of London on this particular occasion. We'd been from London, I think we were in Rome, and we'd been to Bahrain, and we'd been to, up to KL. Anyway, we'd been together for a few days, and we were in fact coming back together almost to London, and it was so unusual that we were really a crew. And we'd been in KL for a couple of nights, I think, or a night. And we had 16 cabin crew members with us. But while we're we come from India, I think. And while we were in KL, 3 of my cabin crew went sick with whatever you want to call it, Delhi belly, jippy tummy or something. They got the runs, and they were sick in KL. And I decided that we would operate light on the cabin crew. We had 13 cabin crew members there. We had 12 doors on a jumbo, I think. And so we had enough people to man all the doors. And I said, leave them here and they can catch up with us, because we were going back to Singapore. We were going to Perth, back to Singapore. And they could have come down and met up with us when they were feeling better. That was the way I'd worked it out. With the company, I'd been on the phone and I'd worked all that out. So we knew we were only having 13 cabin crew. And because of that, I'd rung the airport, which is unusual, and I'd said, okay, put all the passengers, they'd said there were about 250 coming through, because they know on the book load, and in fact we had 247 passengers. So I said, put them all downstairs, first class in the front as it would be, but we'll have and at that stage, that jumbo was set up to have an economy cabin upstairs. And I'd said, right, if anybody comes in that cabin, move them all downstairs, so we've got nobody in the upstairs cabin, and therefore we don't have to have a cabin crew member up there. Just the 3 of us up on the flight deck. And so that's how we started. So it wasn't a normal sort of sector. We'd had a bit of discussion about it. But because fuel was cheap in KL and it was dear in Oz, I'd filled the thing up to the gunnels, so I could have gone forever. Had a full tank of fuel. We set off, and it was all very, very normal. The aeroplane came in half an hour late, and that had a big effect on what happened to us. Because if we'd taken off half an hour early, we would have missed the volcanic eruption. But as it was, we were half an hour late. We took off, and it was a very calm night. We took off, reached up for the sky, and climbed up to 37,000 feet directly, even with full tanks. It was a beautiful aeroplane. And we set off across. The routing was KL down to overhead Singapore, across the Jakarta, or Straits of Jakarta, whatever it's, Java Sea, to overhead Jakarta, and then in a straight line from Jakarta down to Perth in Western Australia. And it was forecast to be a fine night, and it was wonderful. Anyway, we got up there, got into the cruise. Usually I would do a few crosswords, so I probably did, had something to eat, and it got to the other side of Java, and everything looked normal. And I said, I'm going to the loo, I need a leak. I got out of my seat, went to go in the loo at the back of the flight deck, and there was somebody in there. So it had to be either a first-class passenger had come up or one of the cabin crew. So I thought, well, I'll take this opportunity, I'll go downstairs and see how they're getting on with the service. Killed two birds with one stone. And I went to the bottom of the stairs. The purser at the front was a girt lady, and I said to her, how are you doing? She said, well, I'm all right, sir, I've finished. I put all my passengers, she said, they're tired, because this aeroplane had come through from London. She said, they're tired, they all want to go to sleep. So they're all asleep, and I've sent the two that work with me, I've sent them down the back to help out because they're short-staffed. I said, well, that's a good idea. And I said, how are they doing down there then? She said, well, the club passengers are all fed and watered, and they're being bedded down, but down the back, there's a group of about 110, 120 Kiwis and Aussies that have been together on a tour around Malaysia. They're intent on destroying their brain cells, and they're going to have having a party. I said, no trouble. Oh, no trouble. We can cope. And I had a wonderful CSD on it. His poor chap's dead now, Graham. And I knew he'd cope anyway. Anyway, so I said, well, if you want me, you know where I am. And I went to go in the loo, and with that, the stewardess that had been in the upstairs loo had come out and gone on the flight deck to see if they wanted anything, and they'd sent her to get me. And I was stood at the bottom of the stairs, all ready to go in the loo, and she said, they want you upstairs. So I went upstairs, and the first thing I noticed, coming round what I call the skirting in the upstairs lounge cabin area, where the air conditioning air comes in, it was billowing in smoke. I mean, I might not be able to smell much, but I could smell this rather acrid electrical burning smell, and it was very characteristic of how the tubes in London smelt in those days. It's not like it now because they've obviously used different brake linings up there or something, but this was characteristic of that. But I went on the flight deck expecting them to say, we've got a fire or smoke in the electronics bay, should we fire the fire extinguisher? But nothing was further from that at all. I went in and they said, come and look at this, it's beautiful. And they were watching on the windscreen a wonderful display of St Elmo's fire. Now, I've seen St Elmo's many, many times in my career in all sorts of places. On the ground at London, in the fog, up in the air. But St Elmo's is quite an attractive thing to watch. And it can manifest as just shimmering lights up and down the windscreen. But on this occasion, it developed into short lightning dashing up and down the windscreen. And it was multicoloured, which it isn't normally. There were all sorts of colours in the rain. And it was, so they were watching the wonderful display. And as I'm sitting down, you know, you're doing everything you can to catch up. And I'm watching this wonderful display as well. And that's when it all started. And the flight engineer says, engine failure number 4 engine. And it wasn't like a normal engine failure, because in the 4 or 5 years I was a first officer when these engines were bad, I'd had 23 engine failures, of which 18 had been catastrophic, got off with a big bang. So I thought I knew what an engine failure was like. But it's nothing like that. This thing was just winding down slowly. And you had to convince yourself it was running down. I mean, he was on it like a shark. He was very, very clever. He was a training engineer. He was bloody clever at picking out a Duff engine. I sat there watching it as the first officer, and it wasn't until we started to yaw slightly, because obviously two engines going on one side or the other, we're going to yaw. And the ball on the turn and bank thing goes out to one side, you know that you're in fact sliding, skidding. So I put some rudder in and kicked it up, and that's how it all started. We shut down engine number 4. We shut it down.